Hi there, my name is Zoe Daly and I'm the founder of Eru. We make sustainable woolen blankets and are reinvigorating a dying Irish tradition of woolworking and working with the land. So since I called the company Eru, I've been working with the energies of these sovereignty goddesses, as they're called, from the Tuatha De Danann, Eru, Maeve, the Morrigan, and Bridget. So I wanted to talk a little bit. They've been sharing with me their wisdom, and I'm glad to share it with you. If it resonates, that's great, and if it doesn't matter, because everyone has their own personal relationship with these beings if they want to. I was talking about last time what I'm guided to share is really that we start remembering and returning to the original template of the sovereignty goddess, who is which is the term that they were known as, these divine feminine goddesses of the Tuatha De Danann that lived in Ireland and across that area, I believe. So the tribe of Danu, as it translates into English as, is essentially the tribe of the Great Mother. So we know that they were working with the divine feminine energies, and they were in right relationship with the divine masculine feminine balance within themselves and as a community. So what's so interesting to me, as they've been guiding me to go back and look at the original form of the sovereignty goddess and to remember this and to weave it into our everyday lives. They're guiding to show me how slowly over time the desecration of this happened, which is really a common story across the globe. I feel they're guiding me to our ancient myths and stories about them, and I'm seeing where these kind of changes took place, these desecrations essentially to the divine feminine started to happen. And I believe it's told through our stories. I believe it's encoded, not always obviously, but when we look back, I think we can start to unravel these myths and see them in a new light. And I believe that these creation stories are very universal, and I think if we look into the myths in our own cultures, that there are a lot of similarities. I think especially to do with this, ripping apart of the sacred marriage aspects of the divine feminine and the divine masculine. And I believe, yes, they are told true stories of how these broke away and how they got distorted, really. So I feel like it's so similar to Mary Magdalene's story, which I believe a lot of us are coming to fully understand the amazing, powerful woman that she was, through the amazing channels that have been releasing information on her over the past so many years. So it's really not surprising. I think that story is just so common, being rewritten, the history being rewritten. And now it's being reclaimed by so many traditions. But really, it's, from what I'm seeing in the stories, it's kind of, it's like a simple thing. It's like the most amazing aspects of these divine feminine aspects, especially I'm concentrating on the sovereignty goddesses, then through stories, these are literally inverted. These qualities that they had were inverted, and then that gets woven into the stories, into the narratives, into the history, and then we come out with these distorted versions of the women, like Mary Magdalene learning that she was a prostitute, and now we're just relearning her story. In the same way, these sovereignty goddesses were powerful, they were respected, they had that rightful balance within themselves, they bestowed sovereignty upon the kings, and they worked in harmony with the land, they worked in harmony with their divinity, and wove all that in for the good of the planet, for the good of the community. They brought in these lineages, carrying these templates. So, if you look at, some of their aspects that were distorted. You know, one of the things, they embodied their sexuality, they embodied their femininity. And often in the stories that we're told about them, this is then turned into, you know, it's just turned into like a base description of them having many lovers, or you know, really turning them into these promiscuous characters that you know, for example, Maeve, Queen Maeve, you know, she is known as having, you know, many lovers, many husbands. I believe, from what I am receiving, that it's, you know, they say there's always a lover waiting at the door, which I think is so, you know, it's so insulting to not just her, but also her king, you know, where I don't believe it was like this. I believe that she was, that reference perhaps to the many husbands was, I believe, is a reference to that sacred marriage ceremony that I spoke about before, where these sovereignty goddesses discern and bestow sovereignty over the king, over the rightful king. So there are many places in Ireland that Maeve is associated with, many lands, many sacred sites where these ceremonies would have taken place, I believe. And perhaps, you know, she was bestowing kingship on the kings in this area, that through these sacred marriage rituals, which were symbolic, you know, that could so easily be distorted into having many husbands or many lovers, or either way, it's meant to make her look bad. You know, that's kind of the feeling it gives. Um, yeah, so that's just one of the ways they're distorted. Another way, which you know, I really believe these sovereignty goddesses, they were guardians of the land. They especially had, you know, kind of guardianship over particular areas, sacred sites, which connected to, you know, sacred, you know, portals and ley lines. They were, you know, the guardians of bringing in the king to protect this area, and spreading these kind of codes out to the community. Um, and they did this with a ferocity, with this divine feminine power, that they weren't afraid of and they didn't apologize for. For me, that's the full ability to, you know, to be the mother, and to be the queen, and to be the nurturer and the lover, and then to be able to step into ferocity when you're, something sacred to you is at risk. So this beautiful lioness quality is so often described, again, I'm thinking of Queen Maeve, as just warmongering. Often she's described as, I know one of our main myths is about a battle that was to do with her, which I have a lot of, which I believe represented. I believe that story is encoded, but essentially I believe that she was many times protecting her land and her community, and not just warmongering or going to battle. Same with the Morrigan. She's associated with battle, associated with death, and with violence, and, you know, but they're all kind of described in this bloodthirsty, warmongering sentiment, rather than this proud ferocity of defending, the way a mother guards her young. I believe they did this for their communities, for their men. Even I believe they did this because I believe their men were under attack as well at some point. If you look at the story of Eru, how Ireland got her name is from when the Tuatha De Danann were invaded. They, before they descended into the hills and made agreement with the invaders to do that, Eru climbed to a tall mountain, and where she was, attacked and by the incoming army, and she did apparently put a curse on one of them, and she did also, along with her two sisters, attempt to defend the land. Where were the men? Where were the kings? That's what I believe is another part of the story. So again, I believe that was them stepping into their ferocity, their guardianship. Um, and she did manage to secure that the name of the land would be called after her. So the name of Ireland remains that to this day. Um, Again, these aspects are distorted. Another thing is like their oracular ability to intuit wisdom, divine messages from the be in communion with the land and with the star systems that they were communing with. That is so often written about as putting a spell on something in a negative way. Again, all these stories, even when you go and you look in, to the kids' stories of like a kid's story of Queen Maeve. I got a book there recently for my daughter, and it was like Queen Maeve, and it was horrible. The pictures of her were like, they basically depicted her like this warmongering, spell casting, crazy woman. And that's just such a common story, isn't it? Of in the modern day, how often women who stand up or who speak out or who call out something are described as crazy making. It's the ultimate kind of gaslighting. So I just think there's such a common thread between the desecration of these women, like the Mary Magdalene story, like what I believe the sovereignty goddesses in Irish mythology have been turned into. And yes, we have this memory of them and there's a respect, and I really do believe especially the women carry them in their hearts with this remembrance. Even if we're not fully aware of it, we carry that remembrance of really truly who they were. But yet I have never found a story being told of them that really honors the fullness of what they were as sovereignty goddesses. Essentially these stories gradually disempower the feminine through the stories. So we're left with this kind of memory of them, or this word of them, that never really fits their true character. There's often stories also of jealousy between the women, how they would have killed one another or cast spells on one another and their children. And I honestly believe that's another distortion. While of course that could have happened, the original template of the sovereignty goddess was very much a sistren. It was very much about, often they describe to me when I ask, there's a lot of triple aspects. The Morrigan has a triple aspect, Eru and her sisters. And when I ask about that, I received that, well, we are sisters of the one. They can speak in a united voice because they're representing the same unity consciousness of the divine feminine. And yet they can step out in their unique individual characters. Whereas I believe these stories have inserted this division between them, which again is just another inversion, I believe, of their original aspects. So I feel like they are asking us to reclaim all these original aspects of, that notion of promiscuity is actually their embodied proud sexuality and fertility and this ability to birth, parthenogenetically, I believe. And that the warmongering was actually often fierce guardianship, with that lioness energy. That the spell casting stories are really about their intuitive oracular wisdom. And often that these kind of division of these jealous stories of women was actually just literally the opposite, the inversion of their oneness and sisterhood that I believe they had. And I believe that was the power of their sovereignty goddesses. So I also was thinking about how how powerful these were, how powerful these sovereignty goddesses were, and about how this inversion took place slowly over time, and how they had to, there was an allowance of, it's like the Mary Magdalene thing. I feel it was, Mary Magdalene was written out of the whole thing. But Mother Mary, obviously, they couldn't get rid of her. But she was cast into a very disempowered role compared to the true nature of who she is. she was seen as, impregnated by God, whereas actually she was a highly trained master who wove Jesus's soul into her body through her, highly trained practices of parthenogenetic birthing. In the same way that I feel like Bridget there was such a following and an honoring of the divine feminine in Ireland from these goddesses, and it was encoded into the land that when these distortions took place, they had to keep a semblance of that. And I believe that's the story of Bridget, who was turned into a saint. So it was like an acceptable way to allow her but diminish her at the same time, because she is, her stories are allowed to remain, and they allow that goddess energy. It's good and bad. At least it was still remained in Bridget's name, and as Saint Bridget, people were able to worship her like that, and still are, and that did carry the memory. But I feel like that was also an attempt to kind of control and cap the power of these sovereignty goddesses in Ireland, especially from learning recently that Bridget's head was removed and is in a church in Portugal. I believe that was, another act of disempowering the goddess. So essentially, I really believe that there is immense power that these sovereignty goddesses have, and they're coming back into our consciousness now. They, assure me that we remember these aspects, and just by talking about them, by sharing about them, we'll reignite our own memory and our own re-embodiment of their aspect. And just as a reminder, this sovereignty goddess for me is basically a representation of the rightful balance of masculine and feminine energies, divine masculine and feminine energies within ourselves, whether that's a man or a woman, and rippling outwards. And really, our society today is in need of that remembrance of the divine feminine, in general, to put back a balance in the world. And I believe the sovereignty goddesses are here to help us with that. It's interesting to me to just recently realize we had these ancient stories and these myths that were woven. It can seem innocent, but yet they have a power in our collective consciousness and our collective narratives when they're retold, that they become beliefs, that they become enacted upon again. Quite, for many years in Ireland, there was this, obviously many abuses took place in Ireland with, especially to the feminine and to mother and child. And one of these were through this thing that happened called the Magdalene Laundries, which is quite well known about. Essentially a network of houses, institutions that were created for fallen women, and women who could have gotten pregnant outside wedlock. These were women who could have been raped and got pregnant, or women who were, poor and had to go, or that women who could have been sent in there for any reason. There was really, it was really a threat to a woman in a society, could have been sent there from her family or from, the local priest who could have determined that, but especially for mother and children. And these were essentially a network of slavery systems operating under the guise of helpful religious charities that were homing these women and providing for their children, when actually they were using their energy for working. They often had miserable lives. They often took their children away from them. These children were known to be given and sold to other countries, under the guise, again, of helping them find better homes. And it only just struck me the other day that these institutions were called the Magdalene Laundries. I mean, it's just, for me, full circle on how that desecration of even taking the name of Magdalene, the powerful name of Mary Magdalene, and using it to embed these abuses in a network throughout. Nearly every county in Ireland would have had one of these homes, and they only a couple of decades ago closed down. So they're a very recent abusive history in Ireland, which I do believe comes from this collective allowance, or this collective memory of the abuse and the kind of gradual degradation and desecration of these divine feminine sovereignty goddesses. So even though that's a hard thing to look at, I believe that by looking at it and identifying it, we can see it and remember that the original template was not this. The original template was a much more fuller version of this, where we honored these divine feminine aspects, and we honored the mother and child, especially through what I believe that these sovereignty goddesses were doing through birthing and bringing in lineages of divine Christhood consciousness into the land. So I feel that this is the time to remember those good parts about them, by seeing the bad and by identifying it, and then moving on from that and rewriting the original stories. Thank you for listening. I hope that was helpful and interesting, and I'll see you soon.